No matter the challenges you and your family face, Tanager is here for you. We'll meet you wherever you are in your journey, and together, we'll define a path to meet your goals. Together we rise. Tanager.
Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning proudly present Together We Rise,
a series based on the RISE Wellness and Resilience framework.
In times of uncertainty and adversity, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and disheartened.
Amidst the challenges our community may face,
let us never lose sight of the strength and resilience that also resides in our neighborhoods.
This series highlights the vital role each of us have in nurturing that resilience.
That community impact.
The power and influence each of us have to show up in spaces
with empathy,
openness,
and kindness.
Because it is in this collective that connections grow stronger,
our compassion shines brighter,
and our spirit rises even higher.
It is together that we rise.
Welcome back for another episode of Together We Rise. Here with you today are your co-hosts, Tanya
and Maggie.
And I'm super excited to be able to introduce our guest with us today, Karla. Karla, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Karla. I work at the Community Foundation. I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation. It's a place I've worked for 17 years, and I'm really, really passionate about building community. I didn't start there. I really started by thinking I was going to work in the policy realm. You know, I'm the product of a teacher and a counselor. My parents were definitely in the helping roles in the community, and so that's deeply instilled in me. I'm also a very sort of analytical systems kind of person, so I guess I always thought I would take a little bit more of the logic analytical part, but the community piece just kept drawing me in, and I sort of landed in this role 17 years ago, and it's just been something I just love. I love being in a place where we're really working with so many different passionate people in the community, like Tanager, and thinking about how we make communities better places to be.
Yeah, I got the privilege of talking to you just about this and hearing your journey and where you ended up, and now like what is so deeply resonating with you in what you guys do every day. And that why for you, but the why for the foundation too, and how that why so deeply connects with creating a community that is centered on wellness and resilience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Community foundations are places that really connect donors in the community who are connected to the community in some way. I mean, they're engaged with us because they love this place and they believe in what it can be. And then we get to work with nonprofits who are just doing such amazing work in all kinds of areas and really find those intersections. You know, nonprofits come in all shapes, sizes, stripes. So I love that, you know, there's like Tanager Place, these children's mental health organizations that are really focused on health and well-being, other social services, but then there's also all these arts and cultural organizations. So all these different ways that really sort of bring people together. And, you know, I think of arts and culture work as sort of being that soul work in the community, but that's like the connection of, you know, what you're doing with a different kind of soul work and helping kids
I love that.
grow resilient and be resilient and healthy, and they're the future of our community. So I love the intersection of how that all comes together.
I love that soul work. Like, what a beautiful way to put that, of like, this is the work of like souls doing this. So some of what you do is kind of connecting different donors and different people to like different passions. Is that fair to say? Like finding how you can connect some of those things that are happening in the community and how we can put some of people's passions and energies into those spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. Some donors come to us and they know exactly what they want to do. Other donors come and what they're interested in is hearing what we know and, you know, kind of bringing to life what the opportunities are. So, you know, a lot of donors are very engaged in volunteering or in some other way in the community. So, you know, one of the things I really love about the word philanthropy is that the root of that is love of humankind. So, I mean, that's really the, and that's the heart of the work that we do. And I think that's the heart of the work that you're doing here.
Yeah. You know, when you say love of humankind, I go back to how that love, how that energy, how that soul work transfers, right, to create an impact. I can't help but think of the word relationships.
Our world feels more fragmented and divided right now, and one of the reasons I love doing community work and community-oriented work is that not to be too rose-colored glasses, but I do think that things are a little bit different when you're getting to relate on a community level. You know, we are not a place that is partisan in any way. I mean, you know, I think I feel driven by the desire for kindness and connection in the world, and so how are we sort of bringing it back to the things that are important to us? You know, I was reading a book recently that was talking about the loneliness epidemic, and so we were talking about this a little bit, and you know, I think that typifies sort of this post-COVID world that we live in, and I think that that's part of, on a local level, on a community level, how are we helping to bridge that? And you know, that's never been something that we've thought about at the Community Foundation as one of the like motivators behind what we do, but I think at the same time it's sort of undergirding a lot of it, that you know, what we should be able to do is help people connect, help people find those sort of commonalities that bring people together in a time where sometimes it feels like we're pulling apart.
And knowing that there's so much power in those relationships, right? And so much goodness comes out of those relationships. Just being able to kind of take a step back and say, our community is better and stronger when we cultivate and take care of the relationships that exist within it.
Right. You know, some of that work is very formal work. I mean, you know, your work that you're doing with children's mental health is, you know, you need people who are highly credentialed and thinking about how to build strong kids. There were examples in this book that I loved that were very informal kinds of things, like a teacher who had his kids, when they came into the room, each Monday they had to draw a name out of a hat, and then they had to do some random act of kindness. They didn't need to call themselves out or say who it was, and they were scared to do this at first, but throughout the year they found these ways of connecting with one another. And it really transformed his classroom. I think there's just all kinds of little ways, you know, big and small ways that we do this. And, you know, I love thinking about, like, how can we move forward? How can we sort of incentivize that? How can that be the community that we live in?
Yeah. One of the words that you said that I keep kind of thinking about, you know, like staying on, because I think it's so powerful, is commonalities. Commonalities. You know, I think sometimes we're so oriented to like be divisive.
And look for what's different, because our brains naturally do that.
Yes, they naturally do that.
Brains naturally look for what's different because we're designed to survive, right? But so we have to have that intentionality to say, like, let's look for the commonalities. Where can we find the commonalities? And how do we bring people along in those commonalities that already exist? But how do we shed light onto them?
All of a sudden, I'm like rewiring my brain in the way that I'm approaching connection, the way I'm approaching a relationship that is looking to share even kindness versus be competitive or be separating or creating. We talk a lot about like, how are we building bridges, not creating values, right? Like, how am I looking for ways that we can integrate and connect?
One of the things in our community that has been like so traumatic, but also, you know, has pulled people together has been the fact that we seem to be impacted by natural disasters.
Oh my goodness,
So,
what a good example.
you know, I mean, I think about the flood in 2008, the derecho, and, you know, I mean, we know across the country, data shows like people pull into their own little corners, you know, whether it's demographics, whether it's political viewpoints, you know, income, neighborhoods, all that kind of thing. But we've had these really powerful experiences here of everybody sort of pouring out of their houses to help other people. I think that sticks with us and sort of rewires a little bit of that DNA that you were talking about, you know, how we have to work hard to sort of bridge those differences. I don't wish any other disasters on this community, and I hope we don't. So I think the question is, how do we sort of create those experiences in our community in healthier ways than having to respond to a disaster.
And that's why I go back to the word commonality, right? Because, you know, maybe we didn't experience the same exact thing at the same time, but the more that I lean into a relationship, the more I'm just curious and hear someone's story and connect and engage, I'm gonna find probably some type of commonality or shared experience that then deepens meaning, deepens purpose, deepens ... that allows us to feel more united as a whole.
Yeah, I think that sense of connection that we have, you know, you think about that like 7 degrees of separation. When we live in a small enough community, I think that power of story and of narrative is so important because it's never very far away from like our own experiences. So I do think that's one way that we sort of capitalize on that and help that keep bouncing around.
We've talked a lot about narrative in some of these different things and like telling stories. I think humans naturally connect through stories, like through hearing other people's stories. And I know that a lot of times when you're trying to connect, you know, people across a community or even donors with different efforts or projects, like stories tell people what this is all about. And there's pieces of those stories that they can connect to and pull out.
I mean, I think stories help create meaning or give meaning to experiences. And, you know, whether it's a donor, whether it's the children that you work with, I mean, I think we're all driven by needing to find meaning and purpose in our lives. I mean, that comes back to this sort of, you know, being the daughter of a teacher and a counselor. Like, those are the conversations that we had around the dinner table all the time. They're the ones we have with our kids all the time.
Yes, so beautiful.
When I think about that, you know, so much of our meaning that we find, so much of the purpose, so much of that connection, belonging generates from relationships. But what I'm thinking about is relationships aren't always perfect, right? They're not always healthy all the time. Like, relationships are messy. Let's talk about the mess a little bit, because part of that messiness is knowing that there is a pathway to repair. There's a pathway to like finding healing within some of those harm done so that we can continue to move forward and not create more and more divisive camps where I'm being really protected and I'm untrustworthy. I'm, you know, pushing people away.
Yeah, I think like there's no real, true, deep relationship without some level of, there's always messiness, there's always harm. Like, you can't have a real relationship without having some level of like, it's not always perfect. If it's perfect, it's probably not as deep or meaningful as we want that relationship to be. And so knowing that that's part of relationships, knowing that that's part of walking through relationships, how do we normalize some of that? Like, we're not gonna do this perfectly, we're gonna mess up. How do we work through that and walk through that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about the role and the need for vulnerability if you're really going to create deep relationships. I mean, for the Community Foundation, this is a year of strategic planning for us. So I'm wanting us to do a lot of listening for, you know, how do we all together sort of envision where we go forward? But that also gets at, you know, where are the messy spots? What's maybe not going so well that we want to think about, and how we start building together towards something that is a little more purposeful into the future and helps us sort of move into that future. And it's not easy, because that does mean we have to be willing to hear that which may be hard to hear or that we don't want to hear.
We have to shift that focus, right, of like when there's mess or when there's something that's not as good as it could be, shifting that from this is a bad thing to this is an opportunity for us to grow. This is an opportunity for us to get better. Knowing this makes us stronger and better in the future.
Well, it's that Brene Brown concept of shame and like getting past shame to saying, you know, like, I'm open to listening and thinking together.
Sure.
How do we arrive at places more willing to listen, more able to hear, more deeply motivated to connect with someone who may be very different than me?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the characteristics for us and how we show up in doing that work is one of opening, you know, being open and being willing to listen. But I mean, I also think about like all the different tools that are available in our community to that. So, you know, coming back to like all your work with children and how are we helping children be ready for the future? You know, what are the different things that we're funding that do that? Again, like kind of going back to that soul work and just, you know, all the different ways that can bring us together and what tools we use. There's so many opportunities. It gets a little overwhelming, and to figure out like what are the tangibles going forward.
Some of those experiences bring so many pockets of people together, and how when we come together and have some of those moments, right, it allows for connection, right?
Right, I think so. For instance, there's some youth art programming that, I think is so powerful. You think about like art therapists in a tanager place environment, but also, all the places that it's bringing families together. It's bringing people together from all over the community and from all walks of life together. One of my favorite things as a parent, and I know you have kids, that was thinking about like all those school musical performances and all the people that we had a chance to talk to. I mean, there are lots of places, if we're intentional about it, that we get to interact, if we're willing to sort of come out of our corner and have meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
Openness is so necessary, right? Like we have to open ourselves up. I was listening to something that was talking about how different it feels to feel open versus to feel closed, and what comes out of that openness. So much joy comes out of openness, learning comes out of openness. And so like thinking about how do we approach relationships from a place of openness rather than from closed or like constricted, because closed and constricted feels very different, and different things come from that.
Is that even like closing, like meaning like judgmental, like critical, rigid, like some of those things? Is just like, how do I even set intentions about how I approach my day to day and the world around me often leads into my ability to then have relationships with people in a ... open way.
Yeah. Just like thinking about when our brains are primed to take information in versus judge what's out there, how different we come across in the context of relationships when I'm ready to take things in versus when I'm ready to put things out there and say, I don't like that, or that's not the way I would do it.
Yeah. Which makes me think of what you were saying, Karla, is like if I'm also open to hear people's feedback, which you guys are kind of in the thick of the process of doing right now. If I'm willing to be willing to hear that, if I hear that, if I integrate that, then we can make changes that benefit the greater good.
Yeah. And just to be clear, we're just starting this. So, I'm taking lessons from this and what we're talking about here.
Another thing happens with that though too. Not only is it like an opportunity for growth for you, but it's also sending a message to people in the community who are partners with you to say what you say and your experience here really matters. And that's a message that I think if we want to cultivate resilience and we want to cultivate wellness in our community, we need to tell people across our community that your experience here deeply matters and your input deeply matters.
I love that idea of co-creating things together. So, I really do think that that's, anytime you kind of take a step back and look at what you're doing, you're opening yourselves up and you're opening your organizations up to think about how are we creating together the world we want to live in, and what are the roles of our different organizations? How do we work together as people, as institutions, to move things forward. So I think that's important.
Such an essence of co-creation is that idea of collaboration, cooperation. Ooh, let's talk about the word cooperation as it relates to humanness and relationships. Right? It means that I have to put some of my own stuff at check and show up in a way that allows me to know that I'm not the expert in the room. I'm not in charge. I'm not using authority. I'm a piece.
I'm a piece of the puzzle. I'm not the whole puzzle. I'm one piece, and I need all these other pieces, right, to put this all together.
Yeah. And obviously the work I do is in the context of so many nonprofit organizations. That's one of the things I really love about this area is that I think our organizations are really good at that. I was just with a group of nonprofit leaders who were talking about their ability to do that and be able to step back and say, actually your organization may be more ideally suited for this, but here's what we can do to help pull these things together. So that can be hard, but also so important.
To say, this is bigger than all of us. Like, this is about community impact. This is about creating a community that is well, and we all play a role. We all have strengths. We all have expertise and knowledge. Like, we have to do this in a collaborative way that centers on relationships, right? It centers on being willing to cooperate and to collaborate in a way that allows everyone to rise up.
I think when we step back too, it's like there's work for all of us to do here. You know, like there's work for every single one of those nonprofits to do. And when we can all do that together and play our role, man, our community is so much stronger because we can really spread out those resources and let folks really get access to them.
You know, I think about the role of disaster in that sort of collaborative environment too, because after 2008 and the flood, as the nonprofits were coming together, they didn't have, none of us had a plan for how to address that. That was kind of the first eye-opening experience, and it wasn't easy, but I think it took what was already a collaborative community and through this like really challenging situation forced these really meaningful connections and relationships, and you have to practice it, you know, and I think it gave this like really powerful time to practice how people all work together. And yes, there are a lot of different organizations that all have different roles and different pieces of the puzzle. I love that image. That's a great image, Maggie.
It is about just believing in the power of coming together, that we are stronger together. That it's that collective. I can rely on other people and they can rely on me. So that when bigger things happen, this isn't the first time I'm ever talking to someone down this street who we are in community together.
You know, like I said at the beginning, I started my career thinking I was going to go into public policy and really thinking about systems and so forth. And I mean, that relates a lot to the work that I do. I'm clearly using a lot of those skills, but that sort of connectional, the relationship kind of thing that you're talking about going to your neighbor, sometimes it's so easy to rely on the system to resolve something. So this like connection of being able to say like, I think we're having a little conflict. Can we talk through that instead of just sort of retreating? And that is such an essential part of building community, is figuring out how you handle those kinds of conflicts.
Then going right back to your thing of like vulnerability, like right in those relationships, I have to have the courage to not just rely on a system, but rely on myself as I am part of the system. I am part of that solution.
Yeah.
What prevents us from retreating? I think it's so beautiful what you just said, Karla, but I think like what prevents me from retreating?
There's going to be positive outcomes from that, and that it will be met with the same kind of intent that you're bringing forward with that.
I think it's also having some faith, right? Believing like if I'm going to attempt this, I'm going to have some faith that I'm going to be met with the same things that I'm bringing to the table. And I think being able to say, I might be the first person that takes the step on this. I might be the first one that says, hey, I want to reach out. That didn't go well. That didn't feel great. Let me be the first person that steps off and see who else follows.
Oh, that's hard to do. Sometimes I get it right. More oftentimes I get it wrong, but it's one of those things that I just keep trying to grow in.
I think for me it comes down to that word influence. I don't have to have a specific role, a specific title, specific, you know, I think responsibility. It is that I have to believe, faith, hope, whatever words we want to connect to it, that I can influence by my choices, by my actions, by my thoughts, because at some point that energy state is coming out, and that influence makes a difference. And in an altruistic sense, it ripples.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because we're talking about things at a community level, but when you boil it all down, we each have this like very deep power to have that influence in our community. So we can talk about all of these things at a community level, but we are the community. Like we are as individuals, that part of the community. We get to do those things to make our community more resilient and more well.
Yeah, we're creating it together. Yes. You want to show up in the world in a way that's authentic to who you are. And part of that then is finding the right balance of being able to kind of own your power and who you are, and not come off in a way that suggests you think you're more than what you should be.
Yeah.
I think also like power in our society feels like something different than sometimes what it actually is, right? Like power sometimes feels like somebody exerting something over you, but really the power is something that happens between people, right? That influence happens between people. And so sometimes I think when we use relationships the way that they really are intended, when we're using relationships to influence and to cultivate and to grow the things that we want to grow, that doesn't feel like power in the sense that maybe like society tells us what power feels like.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah, and I think that was my like ultimate reflection is like, okay, so if I open up my mailbox, right, and I have mail from down the street to someone else's address, not mine, like I think it may be insignificant that I'm walking it down to their house, but there's power in that. And I think because sometimes we walk in the world, you know, like with that imposter syndrome, or what I do doesn't really matter, or no one really noticed, it won't make that big of a difference, we sometimes don't lean into relationships and lean into understanding how deep our influence contributes to the world.
And using your power to help create that power for other people,
Yes,
as
and my
opposed to holding it
privilege.
all and
Yes,
hoarding it.
yes. And I think that's what I really walked away with, and how much that connects to relationships. You know, that I feel like maybe it's insignificant that I text a friend and said, like, thinking about you, I know today's gonna be a long day, because I don't feel that I hold any power. I don't feel like I hold any, you know, significant influence. But it's like a friend then could tell another friend, gosh, you checked in on me and it made my entire day.
Yeah, and I think thinking about it from the other end too, when are times where somebody has been deeply influential in my life, and it's not when they've exerted power over me, but it's when they've poured into me via relationship, right? That's when it really matters, and we all have that capability and that possibility to do that for other people.
Yeah, the power is in relationship. The power is in connection.
I agree.
Karla, I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today and everything that you do for the community. Oh goodness, I can't wait for people to watch this segment, because I think you speak to something that oftentimes we're thinking about, we're reflecting on, we understand as a concept, but then, you know, I think to feel at a deep level the power of that connection, the power of those relationships, the power behind repairing when harm is done, the power of our influence, it matters.
Well, this has been a really fun conversation,
Yes.
so thank you both. You're doing amazing work in the community.
Well, thank you so much, Karla. Stay tuned. Next time on Together We Rise.
So it's a good perspective to understand that when you're interacting with something, you have to lead with your heart. You have to understand that you don't know all that's going on, but you just have to be there for them.
In order to get through the hard stuff, we have to see ourselves serving a purpose, right? And outside of ourselves, really, right? It's something that drives me to wake up every day, something that drives me to be here.
Keep that smile, but share that story, because it's important to share that positivity, because then it's, you know, it's going to help other people maybe feel a little bit of happiness inside.
No matter the challenges you and your family face, Tanager is here for you. We'll meet you wherever you are in your journey, and together define a path to reach your goals. Together we rise.
Thank you for joining us today and for spending time with us. We hope today's segment offered hope and inspiration. Today's series brought to you by Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning. For more information, please visit our website at www.tanagerplace.org.
Tanager is here for children, teens, young adults, and families as they navigate the many stressors of the world today. Tanager inspires, empowers, and heals by providing tools and support needed to navigate the hardships of life and overcome obstacles. Our expertise and specialty trainings offer a wide range of approaches, and we'll join alongside you to create solutions to enhance your wellness. We are here for you and your family. Tanager, inspire, empower, heal.